We need to change the way we talk about mobility and stability, the way we think about them. Mobility and stability are not on either end of the same spectrum. They are intricately linked, but they're not polar opposites. Mobility can present itself in stable states, and lack of mobility can actually create instability in the form of an inability to generate strength in certain positions. The opposite of mobility is hypomobility, and the opposite of stability is instability, simply put. In an ideal world, we want to be able to cover either ends of both the mobility and stability spectrum. So ideally, the end of our mobility spectrum would be more something like rigidity. So if we think about, instead of thinking about hypomobility, we're thinking about braced rigidity. Think about bracing when you want to deadlift and when you want to squat. So it's controlling and limiting mobility voluntarily, intentionally. For stability, let's think about instability rather in a positive way as adaptability. So we want to have some adaptability, so some ranges in which we can work. Okay? What do I mean by degrees of freedom? So when you think about a stable system, a system is stable if I can apply a perturbation and it will return to its unperturbed position. So it will do what it needs to do to return to its position of equilibrium. Your degrees of freedom are that area outside of your unperturbed position that's still within a recuperable vicinity of that position. So think about, if this is your unperturbed position, then these are your degrees of freedom. So you can handle a perturbation anywhere inside here and be able to come back to this position of equilibrium. The greater your degrees of freedom, the more perturbation your system can handle without injury. The more it can return, the more that recuperable vicinity is big. Okay, so that's what we mean when we talk about degrees of freedom. How do I do that practically? I need to work in my planes of adaptations. We tend to work a lot in the sagittal plane, and we need to work in our planes of adaptation, our transverse plane, our frontal plane. So what does that mean practically? The knee needs some varus and valgus stress. The spine needs to work in the planes of rotation and lateral flexion. So we need to incorporate that type of movement and be able to control that type of movement so that we maintain our degrees of freedom. So remember, mobility and stability are not at either ends of the same spectrum.